Order. I call the Honourable Member David Clendon.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Kei te mihi nui kia koutou. Ki na manahiri nā hapu katoa o Ngati Pahauwera. Tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm pleased to stand on behalf of the Greens to express our support for this legislation. And contrary to what my esteemed colleague has just said, we are by no means interested in delaying the progress of any settlement legislation, but we are entirely unwilling to sacrifice fairness or justice for speed. That is our position, and I thank the member for giving me an opportunity to restate it. So we acknowledge the very long road, the very considerable hardship and loss that has been suffered by Ngati Pahauwera over many, many years. We acknowledge their leaders past and present, whose work, whose determination, whose perseverance has brought them to this place, to this point of, if not resolution, at least a considerable step towards that final resolution. So sadly, reading the history, the background to the settlement bill, the history of Ngati Pahauwera, sadly it is all too familiar. It is a story of people who in the turbulent times in this country in the mid-19th century were obliged to participate in wars and conflict not of their making, and to their considerable loss. They lost not only their homes and resources, they lost their friends, their whānau. It was a bad time in this country. We saw the destruction of social and economic as well as physical resources and systems, the structures that supported and had supported those people over many centuries were destroyed, and it is only now, over 100 years later, that we seek to see those structures rebuilt in a way that meets the needs and the aspirations of the people who will benefit from these settlements. Mr. Hodemir has already made the point that the bill records that following hostilities in 1866, there was a raupatu, a confiscation of all land between the Esk River and the Waikari River. And some of the whānau and hapu who lost land in that raupatu were indeed the same people who had stood alongside the Crown. And it was indeed a very shabby reward for their loyalty, for their support, for their commitment to that particular side in the battles of the day. There was a loss of land, there was an ongoing loss of well-being of those people. And even indeed after the shooting stopped, again, too common a story, the Native Land Court, other agencies of the Crown continued to nibble away at the resources, at the possessions, at the rights and the well-being, and it's only now that we seek to amend that loss, to make good that loss, to provide some means, some wherewithal for a rebuilding to begin. So it was my pleasure, as recently as last Sunday, to travel through some of the land that is affected by this settlement. Travelled from Gisborne, through the Hawke's Bay, through the Wairarapa, back here to Wellington. And in the course of that journey, there are many stunning views, there are some very beautiful landscapes, but I'm hard-pressed to think of a more dramatic or more memorable landscape than that around the Mohaka River. Those incredible vertical cliffs dropping to the river, extraordinarily rich in scenery, rich in natural beauty. Unfortunately, that richness is not reflected in the well-being of many of the communities who live in that area. And as recently as 2001, we know an assessment of the people living in the Mohaka Rauponga area found that those people were living at the lowest level according to the New Zealand Index of Deprivation. And that is I dare say it is a great crime, in fact. It is a great misfortune, a great shame that people living in such a rich and diverse, potentially rich part of the country have been reduced to such a condition. The economic, social and cultural well-being has been stripped away over many years by the process of colonisation. And it is a real genuine privilege to be able to make a very small contribution to the making good, to the amends that are now beginning to be made to that. So the Ngati Pahauwera, under the provisions of this bill, will gain some co-management rights to the Mohaka River, the Waihua and the Waikari rivers. There will be a co-management process in place, and that is a good thing. It may not entirely meet the aspirations of those people, those kaitiaki, who may have preferred even more control and authority over the rivers and the future use of them, but it is a significant step and is not to be undervalued. I'm sure that Ngati Pahauwera will be very active, very committed partners in seeing to the restoration of the river, seeing to the future care and indeed the utility of the water in it, the management of those taonga tuku iho. So with this co-management, the resolution that is being acknowledged and passed today is a considerable step towards an ultimate resolution that will genuinely honour the spirit of the Treaty of Waitangi, a step towards enabling genuine exercise of tino rangatira-tanga in this area we're speaking to specifically and in the country generally. So it only remains for me again to wish Ngati Pahauwera every success as they utilise what has been given back to them, as I'm sure they will, to build a much more positive and a much more positive future for themselves, for their descendants. We wish them well in that endeavour. Kia ora koutou.
I call the honourable member Jamie